YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you about these books. All of these books constitute my library haul. I went to 2 libraries yesterday, and so these are the 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 books. 10 books that I took home with me from the library yesterday, from 2 libraries. I don't live in Harlem anymore, but I still go to Harlem every day for work or church or the youth groups that I work with, or apparently to go to the library. So while I'm there, I have an opportunity sometimes to stop by the libraries and peruse the shelves. And even though I do go online and reserve books and have them sent to my favorite library, I also have another library that's pretty close that I go by. And so these are the results of 2 libraries that I visited yesterday, and I'll tell you why I have each one of the books.
I could stay like this, forever following you.
I try not to read too much about a book synopsis before I read the book, especially if it's something that I'm planning to read pretty soon. If I buy a book and I don't think I'm going to be reading it for a while, I don't mind reading the synopsis now, because I know that by the time I get to the book, it's a possibility that I would have forgotten all the details that were shared in the book synopsis. But for these, especially since I got them from the library, if I'm going to be reading them, I'm probably going to be reading them pretty soon. So I don't want to know too much about the book. I want to experience it organically. But quite a few of these are books that have been popular here on BookTube, or books that are popular just historically. Some of them are modern classics, and so I probably won't need to tell you what the books are about. You would have heard about the book before, maybe even read it yourself. So I'll tell you the title of the book, of course, and I'll tell you why I have the book. The first one is W.E.B. Du Bois, or Du Bois. I've heard that his name is properly pronounced Du Bois, but I'm not sure. This prominent Black figure, this is his book, The Souls of Black Folk. And I'm doing a reading challenge on Facebook, where one of the requirements was to read a book that was over 100 years old. And I've been wanting to read something from this author for a really long time, and I thought it would be a really good time to pick up this book. But one of the requirements for the challenge is that the books need to be over 200 pages. And when I picked this one up, this is the thrift edition, and it's only 165 pages. So even though I'm planning to read it, it's not going to qualify for the challenge that I wanted to use it for. So I'm still going to read it, and I'm going to try to read it before the end of February, just because it's February, Black History Month, and I'm trying to read a lot more books that feature African American or Black figures, Black history figures, and I want to read it. I mean, there's no reason that I should have a book that's 165 pages that I've wanted to read for several years and still not have read it. So I picked this one up in the library. I saw it on the shelf, and I love when I walk into the library and there are brand new books. Like, this book has not been read at all. It's never been checked out. It's never been read. And so I like the fact that this is a library book, but I get to read it as my own book because it's brand new. So W.E.B. Du Bois, this is his collection of essays. It was first published in 1903, and it says in the synopsis, which I'm going to read because I know what this is about. It says, he eloquently affirms that it is beneath the dignity of a human being to beg for those rights that belong inherently to all mankind. He also charges that the strategy of accommodation to white supremacy advanced by Booker T. Washington, then the most influential Black leader in America, would only serve to perpetuate Black oppression. And I was having a conversation with Mr. Brown yesterday about this book, and we were talking about the differences between what he advocated and what Booker T. Washington advocated. And while they were both very prominent and very celebrated in their own right, their ideas were probably conflicting. And so I want to read from both of these authors. I want to read this as well as I want to read something about Booker T. Washington. Starting with this one, obviously, because this is the one that I got from the library yesterday. And I'm hoping to add this to my February TBR. I might even be able to read this later this week. I could read this in a couple of hours. So that is the first book from my library haul. Most of the books here are going to be Black History Celebration, but definitely not all. I also picked up 2 books by James Baldwin. The Fire Next Time, it says on the back, is an intensely personal and provocative document. It consists of 2 letters written on the occasion of the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation that exhort Americans, both black and white, Attack the Terrible Legacy of Racism. This publication is just over 105 pages long and it's 2 letters. I could read 2 letters. There's no reason to not have read some of these books considering how short they are. Like, we're not talking tomes here. We're talking 105 pages that are pretty small pages. So this is something that I could probably read in an hour. And there's absolutely no reason to have not read James Baldwin, especially since he's one of the classic authors that are significant, that are representative of the Harlem Renaissance and the whole Harlem writers period. And I've only read one thing by him. I read I Ain't Your Negro a couple of years ago, and yeah, I need to read these books. So I picked this one up. Again, this is a brand new edition, as is this one. I love going to the library and finding brand new books. So I'm going to be reading this one probably today because, yeah, I'm going to find an hour. Even if it's an hour when I should be sleeping, I'm going to be reading this book and I'll tell you more about it soon. So you'll hear more about The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, as well as Go Tell It on the Mountain. I think this one is a novel. This one is a lot bigger. It is 230 pages. But again, none of these are huge reads. None of these require a huge time investment. So I'm going to be reading James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain. I'm adding all of these books to my February TBR. So you know I'm kind of setting myself up for a challenging month. Let's call it that. But Doris from All the Books, I just watched her video this morning. She announced a readathon that she's doing in the last week of February because, like me, she's one of those people who don't get that much read during the beginning of the month. So at the end of the month, we're trying to make sure that we get all our books that we started finished. We read a lot in the last week in the month. So the last week of the month, she has announced a readathon. And I think I'm going to be pushing the limits and seeing how much I can read in that week. So even if that's when I get a chance to get to this, I'd love to read these 2 books by James Baldwin in February. So Go Tell It on the Mountain. It says Baldwin chronicles a 14-year-old boy's discovery one Saturday in March 1935 of the terms of his identity as the stepson of the minister of a storefront Pentecostal church in Harlem. I lived in Harlem for several years. I didn't read a lot of James Baldwin then. Now that I don't live in Harlem, I'm taking the time to celebrate a place where I lived and was inspired to write and publish my own works by reading some of the classic, modern classic literature written by some of these very important celebrity Black writers from our history. And so I'm adding James Baldwin's 2 books, as well as W.E.B. Du Bois' book. So that's 3 books that I got from the library yesterday that I'm adding to my February TBR. And as if that wasn't enough, someone commented on my video and told me to check out, if I liked Mouse, the graphic memoir Mouse by Art Spiegelman, that I should check out the graphic memoirs of John Lewis's life. John Lewis is a very famous African-American congressman, historical figure. This is him right here. I think he was one of the figures that worked with Martin Luther King Jr. And there's a trilogy of graphic memoirs about his life. They were written by him. I went to the library yesterday and I got these 2. I have book 1 and book 3. I don't have book 2. So what happened was, when someone, a subscriber, I can't remember now exactly who it was, I'm sorry, but someone recommended that I check out these books. I went on the library catalog to reserve the books online. And of course I reserved them, but then I went to the library and I saw these 2 on the shelves, so I picked them up. They didn't have book 2. Someone had checked out book 2. So I took these 2 up and I still have a reserve on book 2 to come. So I'm gonna start this one and hope that book 2 comes in before the end of the month so I can read book 2 and book 3. The page count is very different. Book 1 has 125 pages and book 3 has 247 pages. So there's a huge discrepancy in page number. But other than that, I like the format. I'm not a huge consumer of graphic novels, graphic memoir, graphic presentation, but I think this is important enough for me to forget that I don't read graphic format very often. This is a story that I want to know more about, and instead of going to Wikipedia, John Lewis, then I could just read this and probably get more of a sense of his experience through reading this. I love the covers. When the second one comes in, I hope I'll still have these here so that I'll be able to show you what all the covers represent. So this is the first cover, and here we have probably the boycott of the bus service in Alabama. This is during the period when Rosa Parks refused to go to the back of the bus, and the black people boycotted the bus company. And then we have these people sitting in at this lunch counter, probably resisting the idea that they're not going to be served just because they're black. So this cover is definitely representative of the civil rights struggle. On the back, this looks like the bridge in Alabama that they walked across to protest the violence against these black people. But when we get to book 3, the black civilians here and the standoff between them and the police, which are on the top. And it's very interesting how it's positioned. So the position of power is at the top, and then here are the resistant people, and they're at the side. But on the back, this is an image of the White House, and it's significant because John Lewis, being someone who fought during the civil rights movement, also received the Congressional Medal of Freedom from Barack Obama, who was the first African-American president in American history. And so it shows his experience coming full circle from the march in the civil rights movement, from the refusal to serve him at a lunch counter in probably the 1960s, to him getting his triumphant moment where he's recognized by the President of the United States, who is a man of color just like he is. So I think it's significant. I really want to read these books. So if you haven't heard about the March trilogy, then this is your recommendation to pick it up and check it out. John Lewis, I don't know much about his life yet, but I will after reading these books, I think. So definitely check him out. And I think that's not it, but I'm gonna save the other exciting book by a black author for the last, because that I'm considering the jewel of this haul. And if you follow me on Instagram, then you already know what the book is. But if you don't, or if you haven't watched my Instagram stories in the last 24 hours, then maybe you don't know. And so the color of my shirt is a hint, but we're gonna get back to that. Another book I got from the library yesterday was Liane Moriarty's 9 Perfect Strangers. Liane Moriarty is an Australian writer. She's one of the few authors who's published multiple books where I've read all of her books. I've read every book that Liane Moriarty has published. This is her most recent, and it's the only one of her books that I haven't read yet, and so it's on my TBR. In fact, it's a book that I chose to participate in a challenge that I'm doing called Book Challenge by Erin. It's a Facebook group, and it goes for 4 months from the beginning of January to the end of April. And the challenge is to read 10 books that meet specific prompts, and this is the book that I chose for the prompt, a title that begins with N. So I'm reading 9 Perfect Strangers. Liane Moriarty's most recent book before this one was Truly Madly Guilty, which I didn't really care for the resolution. I didn't care too much for the reveal, but I'm really excited to read all of her books. Like I said, she's the only author who's published a lot, who have read everything. In order to keep that going, I either have to read everything that she has published, or I have to find another author and read all of the books that they have published. And so until I do that, I need to make sure that I'm keeping up with Liane Moriarty's publications. And so I'm going to be reading this. I don't think it's going to be on my February TBR, but I have to see when I need to return it. And if I can push this to the beginning of March, then I'll leave it for that, because this book is 450 pages, and I don't know when I'm going to read that. So I'm leaving that for a little bit. Next 3 books are books that I chose because they are longlisted for the Booktuber Prize, which I'm trying to read more of the books that have been nominated. I'm going to be judging a future round, and so I just want to read as many of the books that have been chosen by the nominators, the people who've nominated books. I just want to read as much of the long list as I can. And so Girls Burn Brighter by Shoba Rail is one of the books that's long listed for the Booktuber Prize, and I don't think I was intrigued when I first heard about it, but here's a synopsis. Poor Nima and Savita have 3 strikes against them. They're poor, they're ambitious, and they're girls. After her mother's death, poor Nima has very little kindness in her life. She's left to care for her siblings until her father can find her a suitable match. So when Savita enters their household, poor Nima is intrigued by this joyful, independent-minded girl. Suddenly, their Indian village doesn't feel quite so claustrophobic, and poor Nima begins to imagine a life beyond arranged marriage. But when a devastating act of cruelty drives Savita away, poor Nima leaves behind everything she has ever known to find her friend. Her journey takes her into the darkest corners of India's underworld on a harrowing cross-continental journey, and eventually to an apartment complex in Seattle. Alternating between the girls' perspective as they face ruthless obstacles, Girls Burn Brighter introduces 2 heroines who never lose the hope that burns within. I have read a lot of books by Indian authors, both books that were set in India, books that featured immigrants who had left India and were living either in the United States or in England or in Canada. And I've enjoyed almost every book that I've read by an Indian author, so I'm surprised that it took me so long to finally pick up this one, but now that I have it, I'm adding this to my March TBR. I don't think that I can add anything else to my February TBR except the last book of this haul, which I'm adding. But Shoba Rail, I think, was nominated for the BookTube Prize. I think that's why I reserved this book, but it came in on my library reserve, so now I have it. I'm gonna try to read it in March. So some of these books, now you know, they're on my March TBR. Another book that I requested last year at the library, and it came in, but I just didn't have time to read it when it came in. I returned it without even opening a page, but I've heard a lot about this book, and it's been nominated again, longlisted for the BookTube Prize, so I reserved it. It came in. It's The Overstory by Richard Powers. This one was nominated for the Man Booker Prize last year, and I wanted to read it then, didn't get to it, and so now I have it. It is about trees and how trees reflect our culture, I think. Oh good, here is my checkout summary for the books. So this one is due on March 6th, so I have a few days in March where I can read this, so I'm definitely putting that on my March TBR. This one, however, my checkout slip says this one is due back at the library on February 27th. So this might be another case where I return this to the library without getting a chance to read it, which just means I'll reserve it again. So here's a synopsis of The Overstory, because I'm not going to read it in the next couple of days, so it's fine. I'm going to tell you what the synopsis says. An Air Force loadmaster in the Vietnam War is shot out of the sky, then saved by falling into a banyan. An artist inherits 100 years of photographic portraits, all of the same doomed American chestnut. A hard-partying undergraduate in the late 1980s electrocutes herself, dies, and is sent back into life by creatures of air and light. A hearing and speech-impaired scientist discovers that trees are communicating with one another. These 4 and 5 other strangers, each summoned in different ways by trees, are brought together in a last and violent stand to save the continent's few remaining acres of virgin forest. I knew it had something to do with trees, but I didn't realize it was also speculative fiction, so that's a little intriguing. As to when I'm going to be able to pick up this over 500 page book, it's definitely not going to be in February. Not even if I read every moment of Doris from All the Books readathon in that last week in February, I'm not going to be able to get to this one because I already have 30 plus books on my February TBR. Spoiler alert, I'm nowhere close to finishing a half of those books. We're halfway into the month. Today is February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day, by the way. Yeah, so we're halfway into the month and I am nowhere close to half of my 30 plus item TBR. But so yeah, I don't have room for this in February. So I'm gonna try to see if I can get that renewed for March so I can put it on my March TBR. Otherwise, I'm gonna return it because I don't have time to read it right now. And then I'll put it back on my reserve list and hopefully it will come in March when I have a little bit more time to read a 500 plus page book. The next book that I have is another book that was nominated for the BookTube Prize, and this is Delia Owens' Where the Crawdads Sing. Every person that I have heard talk about this book raves about it. I heard Doris from All the Books rave about this book. Robert from Barter Hordes, he's the organizer of the BookTube Prize. He recently read this book and he talked about how beautifully written this book is, and I wasn't really excited about the crawdads in the title when I first heard about the book last year, which is why I probably didn't pick it up. Plus, I had a lot of other reading projects going on last year, but now that it's been longlisted for the BookTube Prize and a lot of people whose literary tastes are similar to mine, and even if they're not, they're people whose judgment I really respect. Now that those people have read it and talked so highly about this book, I'm gonna read it. So here's a synopsis so you could read it with me sometime. For years, rumors of the Marsh Girl have haunted Barkley Cove, a quiet town on the North Carolina coast. So in late 1969, when handsome Chase Andrews is found dead, the locals immediately suspect Kaya Clark, the so-called Marsh Girl. But Kaya is not what they say. Sensitive and intelligent, she has survived for years alone in the marshes she calls home, finding friends in the gulls and lessons in the sand. Then the time comes when she yearns to be touched and loved. When two young men from town become intrigued by her wild beauty, Kaya opens herself to a new life, until the unthinkable happens. Perfect for fans of Barbara Kingsolver and Karen Russell. Barbara Kingsolver, I have not read any of her books. Karen Russell wrote Swamplandia, which I have not read. I'm not really sure that I am the target demographic for this book, but I'm gonna try it out. Let's see. So like I said, I went to 2 libraries yesterday, but I actually checked out books 3 times because the first library I got 1 checkout slip. Then the second library I picked up my 2 reserves, and then when I was leaving, I saw the other book, the last book that I'm going to tell you about. I saw that on the shelves just hanging out by its lonesome, and so that is on a separate slip. So this one is my checkout slip for most of the books that I just told you about here. And so I'll tell you the due dates. So Where the Crawdads Sing is due back on February 27th. I'm not going to be able to read this in February, so we're going to see if we can get that one renewed. Cover Story, I've already told you, is due back on February 27th. This one is due back on March 6th. 9 Perfect Strangers is due back on February 27th. What's with these short dates, guys? I can't read all the books by then. The March books are due back on March 6th. The March books are due back in March, so that's good. As well as the James Baldwin books. These are also due back on March 6th. And the Souls of Black Folk also March 6th. So these books I have until March. That's good. Then the last book is one that I'm probably the most excited about, even though I just knew about the book 2 days ago. This book was released on Tuesday. I went to the library on Wednesday and the book was on the table. It wasn't on a shelf. There's a table that features Black experience because I'm in Harlem on Black History Month. So yes, there are tables that feature Black experience books. And this book was just hanging out there, and it is Miss Toni Morrison's brand new essay collection. It is entitled The Source of Self-Regard, Selected Essays, Speeches, and Meditations by Toni Morrison. Release date February 12th. What's today's date? February 14th. This is a brand new book. No one has read this book. It is a perfect hardcover. This is a book that costs $28.95 in the USA, in Canada $38.95, and I'm going to be reading this copy from the library for free. I'll probably buy my own copy. So far in February, I've only bought one book, and that was, of course, Mr. Marlon James's brand new Dark Star Trilogy, Book 1. So I owe myself a couple more books to support Black authors, and I say I'm gonna buy that before February. We're halfway into the month. I haven't bought anything else yet, so this might be the book that I buy. Miss Toni Morrison's meditations and speeches and essays. There are 345 pages in this book. The due date back at the library is February 27th, which just means I'm gonna have to read it now. This is the kind of book that I know I won't be able to renew it. And if I take it back to the library and reserve it, it's gonna take a long time for me to get it back. So it's in my best interest to knock some of the books that I had planned to read off my February TBR and just read this book. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to incorporate it. There are 343 pages, and so what I'm probably going to do, I have 14 days, and so if I read 14 times 20, if I read, say, 25 pages every day, I'll be able to read this before the end of the month. So expect to hear from me about this book before the end of the month, that I've read it and that I love it, because Toni Morrison is goals. She's writer goals, she's woman goals, she's just person goals. Her confidence, her self-assuredness, it is awesome. And so I'm really happy to have this book. I'm going to be reading it. I'm reading 25 pages today and 25 pages tomorrow. And so that's it. These are the 10 books that I got from my library yesterday. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know if you're going to be reading any of these books and if you want to chat a little bit more about them. If you see a book here that you'd love to buddy read with me, I'm doing buddy reads, doing a lot of buddy reads, and I'm enjoying every one of them. Some of them I've done on Goodreads. A few of my buddy reads now I'm doing on Voxer, which is also really enjoyable because instead of typing everything, you can send you can send voice messages across this app. And so that's pretty cool. So if you're reading any of these and you want to read and discuss or do a buddy read, a dedicated buddy read with me, would love to talk with you about them. I'm going to put these books now because they're really heavy. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Subscribe if you want to see more. I post videos almost every day now because I just have so many bookish conversations I want to have with you guys. So thanks for watching this video. Let's talk in the comments, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.